Alright. Okay, so we're gonna put together the computer. Right now we have the motherboard in front of us. We're gonna do a little work on the motherboard, and then we're going to go ahead and do some work on the case.
So right now you're just installing everything into the motherboard so it can be ready to put into the case, basically.
Yeah, usually what you do is you install a few pieces on the motherboard, because once you get into the case, especially if you don't have like a big case, it can be too tight to work with. The maneuvering is hard. Yeah, gotcha. So the first thing we're going to do is put in the processor. Right? So this particular socket has these two levers. This opens up like a little door. Now, when you take the processor, there's always a little triangle. Yeah, I'll show you a little triangle, right? And there's always a triangle on the socket. Sometimes the triangle's on the plastic piece, sometimes it's on the actual.
Let me see the triangle again.
So you can see this triangle here?
You're right, okay.
Or this triangle here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just line it up.
Line the triangles up. Now, in the case of this particular motherboard, it also has a triangle here.
Oh, perfect.
You know, so you put this little lever here, it's gonna catch the top of that tray. It's a little weird just to spring load in there, like it's always a little nervous. But then you sort of lock your processor in, not gonna go anywhere, you can't move it at all. And that's your processor, that's it. You take a stick of RAM. Now, different motherboards will have, I'm just gonna install the red RAM because I know that this works. Different motherboards will often have different orders that you can install the RAM, and there'll be little named RAM like slots. There's writing on the motherboard in order. This particular motherboard, because I read the manual, I know that I go with the 1 slots. So if you look here, it says DDR4 D2, DDR4 D1, DDR4 C2, DDR4 C1. The way that this motherboard reads RAM is from A1 to B1 to C1 to D1, right? Then it goes A2, B2, C2, D2.
And I'm guessing the RAM will have those same numbers on it.
So that's just, the RAM is just the RAM. This just happens to be like the order that the motherboard reads for RAM.
Gotcha, right?
Okay, I know. So like I could take a stick and I could put it in any one of this, and most likely the motherboard would just pick it up.
Okay.
But in order to get like the best use out of my RAM, then I would install it here, which is your A1 first. Now, it's not that hard. There's a little notch in the middle. It lines up with a little notch here, right? So there is, you can put it in this way, and then the notches line up. You can put it in this way, and the notches don't line up.
Oh, okay.
Right? So you can only put it in the right way.
So you'll know if it's in the right way.
Now, these little pieces, I've opened them up beforehand, okay? I take this, I line it up, it goes in here. I put it in wrong, see? I can't push it down, it rocks.
Okay.
Now, if I put it in the correct way, now, like I said, this takes a little more force than you might be comfortable with. But you're gonna hear that click.
Hear that click, okay.
Okay, most people, the #1 problem with a new build, when you install the build and it doesn't work, they put in a stick of RAM, okay, and then they push it, and they heard that click, but this side isn't clicked in, right? You see how it's not level compared to this one? That is the #1 problem when you build a computer and it does not start.
Okay.
#1, everybody does it at least once. It's another main reason why you install the RAM when you're not in a case, so that you can easily
so you make sure
hear
you're
that click.
pressing down on
You know, because once you got like everything in the case and all your wires everywhere, trying to put RAM in gets a lot harder. Now, I'm only using half the RAM. I could go ahead and install more RAM if I wanted to, or whatever, but we'll probably do an upgrade RAM video later. Once I have sort of my RAM installed, my processor installed, it's time to install the heatsink. Now, I have...
Which is the cooling.
Probably, yes, this is the cooling. Probably the most common heatsink on the market that you can buy. This thing is like When I bought it, it was like $12.
Really? And what is it called?
It's a heat sink. This one is the Cooler Master. I forgot which the product number was, but we'll link it in the description.
We'll figure it out and link it, yeah.
But this is by far the most common cooling. You have like your radiator, you've got the heat block that you use the thermal paste to connect, you've got a fan, you got the little cord to the fan, right? Now it's important to note, before I do this, that there are little headers on the motherboard. You see this little 4-pin header?
Okay.
Okay. Now next to these 4-pin headers, there's one here, there's one here, there's one here. They say fan, right? This is CPU fan 1, right?
Okay, so right here.
Yeah, this one right next to it, like right next to it. If you could just see, I'm gonna say this one right here, because I'm gonna point with the screwdriver. This says CHA_ fan 1.
Okay, that's what we're looking for.
Okay,
Fan.
so that means that's a chassis fan. That means it goes to your case.
Gotcha.
This is CHA fan 2, another chassis fan, right? This one here is CPU fan 1. This is your CPU fan 1. This is your CPU fan 1, right? When you plug this in, this plugs into CPU fan 1, which for the motherboard, for me, is right here.
Okay, so why wouldn't you been able to put it over here to this fan?
So when the computer turns on, and it has thermometers all over the board, it can tell what the temperature is. And as the temperature of the CPU rises, it wants to speed up the CPU fan. Like that's why when your computer gets hot, like you hear that. That's usually the CPU fan, right? Has been plugged into the CPU fan slot. And your computer's like, CPU's too hot, I'm playing games, I'm throwing frames. I need to cool my CPU, because as the CPU heats up, it becomes less effective. Right? It consumes more power and does less work. It's just, it's too hot, I don't want to work, and so it doesn't.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead and put a little thermal paste on the CPU. Everybody is gonna criticize this piece, okay? There's nothing more controversial than putting thermal paste on the CPU.
And so why are you?
Believe it or not, every single person, well, it's not, no, everybody does it. Everybody puts thermal paste on it, 100%. But everyone's like, oh, they used too much, or oh, you didn't put it on the right way. Like somebody always got to criticize, and if they're going to criticize,
so let us know if he's doing it the right way.
if they're going to criticize, they're going to criticize the thermal paste. Now you don't need much. I usually just use like that is way more than you will ever need. I put on extra thermal paste just for you guys.
Just a little taste extra.
So that's way more than you're ever gonna need. Now, this, I'm gonna install on the, so there's a little, it's a little bit of a fiddly bit, right? There's a little pin on the bracket, and there's a little hole there on the water block. Oh no, not the water block, the cooler, right? So like if it's not lined up, it doesn't click in.
Okay.
So that's a little bit fiddly.
So you just need to get it lined up.
Some people like to spread the thermal paste around. Some people are like, oh yeah, you know, so we're gonna hear about this too. But there's 4 screws here, and they need to line up to the 4 screws on the cooler.
Easy enough, okay.
Yeah. So the cooler usually clicks, like it's usually positionable. I'm gonna go ahead and check my thermal paste spreading. Say that's not gonna be enough, so we're gonna spread it out a little bit. Now, some people, when you buy thermal paste, it'll have a little almost shovel, little plastic shovel.
So you can spread it out.
Yeah, we just throw that away. Some people spread it out with credit cards. Some people spread it out however they spread it out.
See, me, I would have saved my shovel, guys.
She would have taken the shovel. She would have. Now I'm gonna take this off because this fan is giving me some trouble. I'm not being too careful with my thermal paste, guys, because I'm going to do water cooling soon, and I know that I'm not going to run this computer very much with thermal paste the way it is. Because usually you want this gray thermal paste to cover like the whole process so you get good contact. So I'll smear it around a little bit more. Make sure we get good contact.
Looks like it's all over it now.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. You want it all over it. And then you put these screws. You tighten it down. Make sure my head isn't in the shot for the camera. Now, usually when you tighten these down, you want to go across, right? So I did this one over here first. Now I'm going to do this one over here. If you tighten both of them on the same side,
you get to the other
they
side,
might not line up
yeah.
when you get to the other side. So usually it's a good idea to what's called cross tighten.
Yeah, that's what I did with my desk. I had to unscrew it so it could line up correctly. That's what most things you're trying to screw.
You always regret screwing things in the wrong order. All right, so I'm screwing, cross screwing, making sure they're all done tight. They will stop. Like, there's no need to use force on this. Like, you just go ahead and screw these in.
So the main thing is just getting it lined up, put the right amount of paste, which Chris didn't do.
True.
Well, an F and F
Didn't do. Nobody did. It's okay, I'm Chris. I go by an to depth, but I also go by Chris. It's easier to search for me on the internet though as an to depth.
An to depth.
Now this fan will just clip like right on the front. Now you can see why I put the RAM in first. You can also see why upgrading RAM would be a problem, right? Because you can't get to this RAM slot. You see this RAM slot here?
Yeah.
You cannot get to this RAM slot with this cooler. Right? Okay. So once you clip this on here and it sort of like slides down, like sometimes there's some spacing issues with like your heat spreaders, right? So like if I put this RAM in this slot, it just wouldn't fit. Like, but it's blocking this
So
slot.
that's why you put it in a certain space.
Like putting the RAM in after you put the cooler in can sometimes be hard. Now there are other styles of cooler that you don't see this. There are other styles of motherboard where the RAM is only on one side, you only have 4 sticks. Right, so there's all different kinds of like components that you can use. Like if you're using like water cooling or one of those like Cooler Master water coolers that just blocks on here and then screws on the top, you'll never see this kind of obstruction.
And understand, when you do your first installing, it's going to be a trial and error.
Yeah, you always gonna make mistakes. The key is to go slow. Like I've been doing this forever, and this isn't even the first time I've built this computer. And I'm sure I've already made mistakes that people are going to point out.
Yes.
So here is the CPU fan. We had the CPU fan here on the motherboard. We plugged it in. And then that is that. Now, because I am installing this M2 hard drive, this is new for me. I used to have everything on this solid state drive. Usually you install hard drives in the case. But since we're installing an M2 hard drive, and you will not always install this. If you happen to have an M2 hard drive, you can go ahead and install it now. And that has this little spacer, this little screw right here and right here. I happen to have 2 M2 slots. Not all motherboards have these, but most new motherboards should. If you're upgrading your own personal computer, you might not have M2. If you're buying a new one, it probably.
So would it say? Does it say it on the motherboard? Where
so
would
it
you
says
know?
Ultra M2 right there on the motherboard, right there.
Okay.
So little sockets. Okay. Now I've managed to lose a screw.
So Mama knows, the motherboard knows what you may need, and it has a label on there. Most things it has a label, so it makes it a lot easier to find it.
We're also going to catch flack because I'm using a magnetic tipped screwdriver. They are going to complain about that. A lot of people say you shouldn't, and technically you shouldn't, but I live by the rule of never doing what I'm supposed to do. It just slides in, More than anything else, it just lines up and it just clicks in.
Okay.
Right, and then you put it down, it lines up. Some of them are a little shorter, like you'll see these little spaces. Some of them are a little longer, right? Now, if your motherboard doesn't have onboard Wi-Fi, you can actually buy Wi-Fi cards that install like this for the M2 as well.
Gotcha.
My motherboard happens to have onboard Wi-Fi. You can tell because it has these little spots for the antennas. Not all motherboards do.
And it's these little gold round things.
Yeah, that's the spot where you plug the antenna in. And everybody's gonna complain about my magnetic screwdriver, but I've got big old hands. Here it goes.
And it's just easy for you to get it in there.
It's easy to put in. It's hard to put the spacer back on. Because I got big old hands. More than anything else. It just twists on like a screw. But I'm gonna get fed up and I'm gonna put it in this other one here. I just can't get it. So my hands are too big. We're not going to use that slot. I hate it. We're going to use this one.
Okay.
Because I have space down here. Bam! So much easier. My hands are way too big for that one. I'm going to go ahead and put this screw in here so I have it later if I need it. And then always have a bowl to keep your screws in. That's all we're gonna do for this outside of the case. We installed the CPU, the heatsink, the fan on the heatsink, the RAM, and the hard drive.